it's a pleasure for UIL to be able to participate and share some reflection. And some of what I want to share with you is part of UIL work, but it's also my own thinking. And as chair, as part of the board, we have that mandate to have intellectual leadership in different debates. So I'm going to mix at the same time UIL work and my own thinking about environment sustainable education. My intervention is about ESD, calls on that ESD calls on all of humanity to become a learning planet. That's going to be my focus. There's a lot of learning we can do. Every learning domain, discipline has its own peculiarity, but environment, education for sustainable development, ESD, has a specific twist to it, because we all as human, we all have a stake as human in everybody else behaviors, values, and all that. So that's the butterfly effect. To me, education for sustainable development is a necessary solution to humanity's self-induced problems. Since a short-sighted understanding of our impact on the biological world and behaviors of damaging consequences have been a root cause of the climate crisis and have put at risk the sustainability of our world, learning to change them is a necessary path that we have to take. Through UN, the global community has committed itself to such a transformative endeavor. And through UNESCO, it has raised the learning challenges that we have to overcome, not as individual only, but globally, as nations, as community, and as a planet, as humanity itself. I find of particular interest a perspective adopted by the UNESCO's International Commission on the Futures of Education. Given the unsustainability of our way of life, the Commission stressed that we have to learn to become. Learning to be, learning to live together, learning to do, and learning to learn, those famous pillars of the 1996 Delors report, are not enough anymore. We have to transform ourselves, and to do so, we have to learn to become something else, as individuals and as a species. My presentation will overview UNESCO's work regarding ESD. I will also highlight some issues and challenges, in particular regarding a more inclusive understanding of ESD, notably from a lifelong learning perspective, which is the mandate of the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. In conclusion, I will emphasize ESD's contribution to becoming that learning planet that we have to become. First point I want to make, ESD is central within UN and UNESCO educational perspective. That's a gain, that's a given. It's not a fight we have to do, it's already there. We have to leverage that. Any human endeavor implies capacities to be developed. Therefore, learning and educational issues are an intrinsic component of any actions and any project, their scope being very limited, personal, or very extended at a national level or planetary level. Overcoming the climate crisis and establishing a sustainable development model are civilizational projects in scope. The capacities they rely on involve essential and transformative learning and education. There's no negotiation about that. It's way more than to be able to use a computer. We have to become something else altogether. States have recognized that by integrating ESD as an enabling condition for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal. Education and ESD are backbones of the SDG, you probably all know that. Beyond being a list of 17 aspirational goals covering fundamental aspects of human, individual, and collective life, the SDG are an integrated framework stressing that progress in one sphere of human life is intrinsically conditional to progress in all, if not many, other spheres. In other words, in committing to the SDG, the international community recognized the intersectorial nature of a sustainable world and that solutions to our most dire challenges call for a holistic perspective. In its essence, that's for me the spirit of the SDG, beyond the fine print of every goal. As one of the 17 goals, education participates to this global integrated platform. First and foremost, it is a goal stating inclusive and equitable access to quality education for all throughout life. As such, it prioritizes basic education and acquisition of relevant skills for decent life and effective social participation. Beyond this mainly formal school-based dimension of SDG 4, there is also an expression of a social demand for knowledges and skills essential for the advent of a culture of sustainable development. And there we get to the core, the topic of this conference. Target 4.7 of SDG 4 states that, and I quote, all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. That was the phrasing of Target 4.7, end of the quote. This target reveals the transformative nature of SDG 4 and the core contribution of education to the realization of a sustainable world. Finally, within the SDG, education is an enabling condition for the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of it, if not all of the SDG, presupposes capacities in individuals and communities. Therefore, many goals imply education and learning challenges. Within this global framework of the SDG, ESD materializes itself through international commitments, targets and action plans, programs and monitoring processes that constitute an international and national political and programmatic infrastructure. Global action programs and roadmaps on ESD keep government focused on concrete actions and timelines. Capacity development programs strengthen government and educators' knowledge and skills in designing ESD curriculum and learning activities. Reporting and monitoring remind everyone of steps taken and the road ahead. I would like now to raise some issues and challenges regarding one dimension of the state of ESD, according to my observation, inclusive ESD. I will focus on some aspect of ESD learners, learning content, and the educational engineering of ESD. Regarding an inclusive perspective on learners, more often than not, the discourse and the practices on ESD limit themselves to youth and the school educational programs and environment. Evidently, a generational transformation is a fundamental educational and social objective. Nobody will argue about that. But such a limited strategy is insufficient, given the urgencies of a needed social and cultural transformation. Not only we cannot wait a generation to put into place a sustainable model of development, but doing it cannot lean only on the next generation's shoulders. More importantly, the younger generation cannot be made the only one responsible to solve problems created by previous generation. In that regard, ESD for adults is therefore urgently needed. Regarding an inclusive perspective on learning content, ESD is fundamentally multidisciplinary. It concerns primarily the functioning and the state of the biological world, but it involves also many learning domains. A recent publication by UNESCO chairs on the topic of the futures of education tackled that question of the learning content of education for sustainable development. Contributors in that publication put forward many domains: culture, responsible citizenship, science, technology and innovation, ethics, philosophical and spiritual life, interlinkage between human and all of biological life, human rights education, social life, arts, etc. As for the learning engineering of ESD, we have to enlarge our pedagogical strategy and favored learning styles beyond the school setting. ESD has to embrace a culture of lifelong learning, to use the title of a recent UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning report, and, in that spirit, must rely on the full possibilities of our enriched educational world. Consequently, ESD must be deployed through formal, non-formal, and informal learning. face-to-face, online, and hybrid modalities. Educational initiatives stemming in length from micro-learning to longer programs, etc. An inclusive approach engaging all learners, youth and adult, integrating a wide array of relevant knowledges and skills in a multidisciplinary perspective, and an educational engineering using the full spectrum of learning sites and possibilities and strategies call for a holistic approach, a necessary holistic approach. Moreover, such a holistic perspective should not be limited to the learning and educational spheres, since ESD calls for an integrated approach linking learning and education to a civilizational and humanity-wide project that goes beyond the world of education. Fundamentally, ESD is transformative in intent. In that regard, its goal is to deeply transform people behaviors and values, as well as transforming societies, cultures, civilization, and all of humanity. We are way more beyond a paradigm shift. It's a civilizational change that we are facing. It is also comprehensive in scope, leading to established and manage a globalized learning ecosystem. I will now turn my attention more to the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, UIL, contribution to ESD for you to be in the know of possibilities for the ESD community to intervene and work with within UIL framework. As UIL chair, I believe that the Institute has a major contribution to make to ESD and is making one, mainly in promoting ESD for all in a lifelong learning framework. Some ongoing initiatives within UIL offer forums fostering the development and the promotion of a more inclusive ESD, in particular regarding ESD for adults and within a lifelong learning perspective. First, the Global Network of Learning Cities provide strategic leverage to bring together communities and create learning spaces integrated in people's daily life, which is a strategic entry point for ESD. Among the key features of learning cities defined by the network, some are directly related to sustainable development. Among them, cities aim to reduce the negative impacts of economic and other human activities on the natural environment, enhance the livability of cities, promote sustainable development through active learning in all settings, and foster a learner-friendly environment. In its first international conference in 2013, the Learning Cities Network recognized that learning communities, learning cities, and learning regions are pillars of sustainable development. In the most recent international conference of the Global Network of Learning Cities in 2019, cities have prioritized ESD. Through capacity building and knowledge and practices exchange, cities will equip themselves to play a major role regarding sustainable development, which is primordial, given that the majority of the world's population reside in cities or urban regions. Second contribution of UIL to ESD, the Confintea 7 conferences. I underline that adult ESD is a missing piece. Within UNESCO and under the responsibility of UIL, there is an international process dedicated to adult learning and education, the International Conferences on Adult Learning and Education, commonly named Confintea. Since the 1940s, 6 Confintea have been held. The next one is scheduled to take place in 2022 in Morocco. Confintea is the main forum within UNESCO where international commitments are made in adult learning and education. For that reason, each international conference on ALE, adult learning and education, is a unique opportunity to call on ALE to contribute to ESD. Taking stock of the progress of specific targets of SDG 4 related to adult would be at the agenda of the 2022 Confintea, as well as committing to further progress. In that normative context, SDG 4 target 4.7 that relate to ESD become an entry point to develop a platform on adult education for sustainable development. In 2021, the preparatory process of the next conferencia will include regional conferences. That would be for all of us a first formal moment to define adult ESD priorities, reflecting sustainable development challenges specific to different regions and ecosystems. A third contribution of UIL to ESD is the Institute proposal to the UNESCO's International Commission on the Futures of Education that took the form of a report titled Embracing a Culture of Lifelong Learning that I referred to previously. In this report, UIL actualized an understanding of lifelong learning that includes all learners and all learning sites and modalities in a holistic, integrated, and inclusive vision of lifelong learning throughout life. In this report, lifelong learning is posited as a major contributor to sustainable development globally and at national and local levels. The report provides an integrated architecture of an ecosystem of learning, extensive to all people and learning needs and to all learning sites and resources. This blueprint of the enabling an environment to construct for achieving a culture of lifelong learning could systematize lifelong education for sustainable development and give it means, conceptual means, strategic means to be put into place for all in our own daily life. Mobilizing cities through the global network of learning cities, providing comprehensive lifelong learning policy through research, innovation, and advocacy, and playing a leadership role in adopting a more comprehensive and inclusive international commitments in ESD at the 2022 Conferencia are three concrete initiatives that allow UIL to enrich education for sustainable development from an inclusive standpoint and from a lifelong learning perspective. Fourth and last point, regarding the decades ahead, some of UNESCO's work offers strategic opportunities to establish ESD within the fabric of everyone's daily life. Education for Global Citizenship is an important platform within UNESCO programs. Already, ESD and education for global citizenship are often evoked together. They are closely linked conceptually and programmatically, at least from an eco-citizenship perspective. Again, in linking ESD and EGC, we refer mainly to youth. The scope of the expectation has to include adult citizenship education. Again, a more comprehensive and integrated learning understanding is a necessity. Artificial intelligence is a major driver of change. This week, UNESCO held a second international forum on artificial intelligence and education. The enormous potential of this technology can give us the knowledge of our impact on the biological world and calculate the ramification of new behaviors and practices that we would like to simulate and integrate in our life. From an educational side, AI can renew the management, support, and offering of learning activities through a personalization of learning with the help, as example, of learning management system and virtual tutors. Through mobile phone in particular, we could reach people in their life. The Commission on the Futures of Education is another major initiative. Launched in 2019, this commission will table its report at the next General Conference of UNESCO in 2021. It would be a major landmark. The Commission has the mandate to reflect about learning and education at the 2050 horizon. 30 years from now, the impact of an unsustainable model would be major if changes are not happening now. Under a call to learn to become, the Commission understands that education will be key to this transformative learning journey we have to embark on. For the ESD community, contributing to the Commission work is of great relevance. Finally, a last aspect that I think ongoing work that could be an interesting forum for ESD within UNESCO and UIL is the right to education for a new era. ESD is about knowledges and competencies. In that regard, it is about accessing learning and educational resources to develop competencies and acquire knowledges. In that regard, it could be understood under the terms of the right to education. Since its inception, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The right to education has mainly been understood as a right for children and youth to access formal schooling and for adults to benefit from basic education. Fundamental education was the word used in 48. In a recent report about the futures of lifelong learning, UIL called to actualize the right to education in favor of a right to lifelong learning. In our time, means of learning are varied beyond school. Needed or relevant knowledges and competencies go beyond the formal curriculum. Learners include nowadays everyone. Consequently, the actual understanding of the right to education could be viewed as inadequate to the expectation of a knowledge society and the educational and learning possibilities that could be accessed to answer those expectations. ESD is a perfect example of growing learning needs, multiple learning sites to answer them, and social expectation addressed to all. The comprehensive framework of the multidisciplinary scope of ESD allowed to bring together different strands of UNESCO's work in the decades ahead, and referring to the International Commission on the Future of Education, the 30 years time span that the report will look up in front of us. In conclusion, in its 1986 book, A Risk, a Society, Hilary Beck brought to light a new social class, all of humanity. Beck explained that any person could be affected by new and intensifying global risk. Nuclear war and pollution exemplified for him in that time those new risks that know no border and that are consequently creating a common class interest for every human being, mainly around the survival of our species. And unsustainable development put all of humanity at risk. There is no 1% or 99% class differentiation, but a shared risk to manage. Evidently, people and nations are not affected equally. But an imminent tipping point that some say we have already reached will create multiple waves of aggravated consequences, disrupting many, if not all, ecosystems. The famous butterfly effect. In that spirit, becoming a learning planet is a global transformative educational project that relies on each of us very localized learning. In that regard, it calls to create a localized ecosystem of learning. Finally, last word in response, as an adult, I feel that as adults, I feel we have to respond to Greta Thunberg's call to the UN General Assembly, that we have to dare. As adults, we have to dare to change. And ESD, as a learning paradigm, at the same time deals with educational issues, learning domains, things to know, things to learn, things to put into practice, but it links to something way bigger, almost at a philosophical, spiritual, metaphysical level. All of us, we are in that proverbial same boat. And we have to teamwork to make sure that all of us know what we have to do and are able to do it to change the world and become, to use that famous UNESCO International Commission on the Futures of Education. And that will be it. I kept some time for exchanges if it's planned in my presentation. But the main message is there's a special mission about ESD because it goes way beyond learning mathematics or learning a language or be able to do something in our daily life. We're interlinked through ESD, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.